The biggest departments, of course, is psychology. And the reason that I'm really enjoy having psychology as part of the life sciences is not only do they have interesting subject matter, but it's really a department full of amazingly good, exciting, highly regarded faculty. And the other part is the way in which life sciences has changed, and the reason that I call it the new life sciences, is that all of our research is really coming from new discoveries by groups of people from different disciplines coming together and asking questions in different ways as a result of the collaborations. And to that extent, psychology is a department that has been doing that for a long time. Now, psychology is not only good because, U.S. News and World Report says they're good, which they do, but classically, they have areas, and each of those separate areas, whether it be clinical or developmental or experimental or social psych or neuropsychology, all of them, within each, they're highly ranked. But what's, I think, interesting is, so they have this tradition of building on quality, and many of you come from this department, so you know what I'm talking about. Really, really superb scholars and researchers and teachers. But the other part that I like about this department, they're always forward thinking. So they start thinking about how can they get their faculty working together. So they have this area, health psychology. What makes more sense than to do health psychology? And one of the individuals in it's in the National Academy of Sciences and the Institute of Health. Then you talk about neuropsychology, and they recently received a major award to have the Center for Cognitive Science. And what does it do? It brings together faculty through many of the disciplines in the department and works with the Psychiatric Institute. And one of the areas that they're really exceeding at is using neuroimaging to get new insights about psychological phenomena. But then we talk about, next thing I know, they've created a new area. And it's not just created an area and put a name, but actually have a new approach called diversity science. And in this area, they have clinical psychologists, social psychologists, developmental, statistical, I don't know who they put together. But what they do is they put it together and they are asking new questions and really raising the issue is, how are we doing research on underrepresented minorities? What kind of insight are we getting? How is the research being done? And how should we be looking at it in the psychological and health professions? And I have every hope that this area is again going to be something that this department is playing a leadership role across the country. Now, if there's ever an area that this department has already made their mark, it's in the area of relationship science. And that's why I'm so delighted to see this panel today, because you're going to see people coming from different disciplines, but providing insight on a topic and really contributing something new. So now I'll just say a few things about the rest of the life sciences. They need to do the same thing, which is, and they are. They're just, and in this regard, we see the whole area of technology through the Human Genome Project and gene sequencing, where we can now do 3 billion base pairs in a day, merging with the need to be able to have the computational power to analyze those data. So we're seeing the kind of same integration of disciplines. Evolutionary biologists talking with, systems biologists. We're seeing that same integration throughout the life sciences. And this is really what makes life sciences the essential science. So psychology is part of the model. It's going to be the way in which the life sciences are playing a role right now. We've got mental health discoveries, physical health discoveries, environmental health issues, all emerging from the new discoveries of the life sciences. So with that, I want to say you should be pleased to be here and associated with such a fine department. I'm pleased to be here and associated with such a fine department. And I will now introduce the chair of this fine department, Dr. Bruce Baker.
Well, thank you and welcome. I'd like to add my thanks to all of you for coming here tonight. It was great catching up with old friends and meeting a lot of new friends out in the reception. It got over too soon. I'm excited to have this opportunity to share with you some of the innovative and significant research that is being done by our outstanding faculty. And we hope that this event will be the first in a series of similar events like this in future years. Now, for those of you who got your degrees from our department, I want you to know that we are doing everything we can to protect the distinction of your degree. I'm proud to report that the recent U.S. News and World Report rankings of psychology departments in the United States ranked UCLA Psychology Department number 3, tied with Harvard, Yale, and Michigan. We have we have 8 specialty areas in the department that Victoria alluded to. All of them are ranked in the top 10 in the country, and several are ranked number 1. In an effort to keep you connected to the department, we've also recently updated our website. Take a look at that. It's really interesting. Lots of newsworthy items about faculty and students, but also about alumni. And there's an alumni link on the page. The website also highlights some of our key initiatives. Victoria actually just mentioned them: a focus on diversity science and an expansion of our very distinguished neuroscience program to include clinical and developmental and tonight social neuroscientists. These initiatives were also highlighted in our recent inaugural alumni e-newsletter. If you didn't receive a copy, let us know and we'll send you one, and I intend to send out similar e-newsletters twice a year from here on in. I'd like to thank you once again for coming tonight. Before I introduce our panel moderator for the evening, I'd like to encourage you all to attend UCLA Alumni Day, which is on Saturday, 2 days from now. Jaana Juvonen, who is one of our panelists tonight, it will be speaking at this event on the topic of bullies, victims, and bystanders, myths and facts. So members of the Development and College Alumni Relations staff are here tonight, and they can answer any questions that you have about the Saturday event. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for this evening's discussion, Professor Ben Karney. Ben received his undergraduate degree from Harvard and his PhD from, UCLA, right. He's a member of our social psychology faculty. He's received several prestigious awards for his research on close relationships, especially marriage. So, Ben?
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks very much. It has been said, mostly I will admit by me, that relationships are to humans as water is to fish. And what I mean by that is that we are born into relationships, they sustain us, and they nurture us. They form the fundamental element of the environment that we live in. And it's true for humans in a way that isn't for all other species on Earth. Take fish. Fish are born, they hatch out of an egg, off they go swimming. Humans aren't like that. When we're born helpless. And each of us would perish, but were it not for that somebody loves us. Were it not for relationships, each of us, our lives would be impossible from the moment we're born. But we do have relationships. And it makes sense that the human species, born as helpless as it is, would have evolved, developed capacities for attending to our relationships, paying attention to where relationships are, how they're going, and maintaining those relationships, keeping relationships alive. That would be a pretty important thing to study. And indeed it has been something that scientists have been studying for a while. And recent research confirmed the idea that relationships are at the heart of what it means to be a well-functioning human being. I'll give you one example of research that makes this point as well as it needs to be made. Research on human happiness. Perhaps you've read, if you follow psychological research, a lot of people are studying human happiness nowadays. And it turns out that if you ask people, how happy are you with your life? And then you get their answer. And then you ask them, now how happy are you with various domains of your life? Your finances, your physical health, your career, and your relationships. Turns out of all the domains of people's lives, the one that is most strongly associated with being a happy person is being happy with your relationships. You can have a great job. You can have a terrific career. You can be rich and healthy. And if your relationships aren't happy, you're not happy. On the other hand, if you have good relationships, a lot of life's other challenges can be sustained, are more easily sustained. It makes sense that relationships, the way our relationships function, has been linked to our health, our physical health. People who are happy with their relationships are less likely to get chronic diseases, more likely to recover from diseases that they do get. They're wealthier, they live longer. This is what science has shown. And it makes sense that this should be, if something so central to what it means to be human, should be the topic of scientific research. But it wasn't always this way. Some of you might remember the late Senator William Proxmire, who was the senator from Wisconsin. In 1975, Senator Proxmire developed, for those of you who don't remember, an award that he called the Golden Fleece Award, which he used to honor, it's a dubious honor, government programs that he thought were spectacular wastes of money. What do you think was the very first government program that he honored with a Golden Fleece Award? A research program sponsored by the National Institutes of Health on how people fall in love. Proxmire said, well, that's absurd. Study love? Study that ineffable phenomenon? It's preposterous. That's not something amenable to scientific research. Well, we've come a long way since then. No one doubts that relationships are a suitable topic for scientific research. There are national and international professional organizations devoted to studying interpersonal relationships. And interpersonal relationship scientists now consult on government policy, on international policy, and have changed the way economies are run, the way medical schools and medical education is run, and the way, arguably, we live our lives. It so happens that a hub of the cutting edge of a lot of relationship science is right here in the psych department at UCLA. If I couldn't count on the fingers of two hands all the faculty whose research touches on aspects of relationships. But we're lucky and fortunate to have today just three of the many faculty who are doing work on relationships whose work is especially noteworthy, surprising, and poignant. And what's fun about our current panel tonight is that they come from three different, although they're all three psychologists, they come from different parts of psychology. So what we're going to do over the next half an hour or so is we'll hear briefly from each of them. And over the course of those three presentations, you'll hear from a social psychologist, a developmental psychologist, and a clinical psychologist, all of whom are studying relationships in different ways. You'll hear about research that gets right inside the brain using the highest technology and the most cutting-edge technology that allows us to look at how brains function. You'll hear about research that uses observational data, longitudinal data, and survey data. And you'll hear about research that crosses many different populations, from virtual relationships to schoolyard relationships to marital relationships. It's a big phenomenon. It's an important phenomenon. And we're lucky to be moving forward. There's still lots of progress left to be made, but we've made a lot of progress too. And I think you'll be as impressed as I am at what you learned tonight. After we hear these three presentations, we've reserved some time for questions. And you'll see there's a microphone standing right in the middle. There'll be time afterwards for people to ask questions, pose questions to our panelists. If you don't have any, I've got a few things I've been wondering about, frankly. And I look forward to playing Stump the Professor when we're done. So without further ado, allow me to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Naomi Eisenberger. Dr. Eisenberger, like some of our best faculty, got her PhD here at UCLA. And in social psychology, she's a social psychologist. But Naomi's background isn't just in social psychology. She also has a background in psychobiology and psychoneuroimmunology. And so that combination of training allows Naomi to look at questions that are at the intersection of the mind, the psychological mind, and the physical body and the physical brain. And some of the questions that she asks are things like, how does social pain relate to physical pain as represented in the brain? It's fascinating work, and I look forward to hearing about it. Let me introduce Dr. Naomi Eisenberger.
Thank you so much. So I guess I'm going to be talking about sort of the dark side of social relationships, social rejection. Better? All right. So if you've ever listened closely to the way that people talk about social rejection, you'll notice an interesting pattern. We tend to use physical pain words to describe these experiences of rejection. So we'll say things like, that hurt my feelings, he broke my heart, and it was a painful breakup. And this pattern is not unique to the English language. In fact, we see this across many of the different languages that you see here. And one of the things that I've been wondering about for the past several years is why? Is it the case that people across the globe are just being metaphorical when they describe rejection as being painful, or is there something deeper here? And what I'm going to talk with you today about is some of the work that we've been doing that explores this question: does rejection really hurt? The first way that we wanted to investigate this was by seeing if an experience of social rejection actually activates some of the same brain regions that are involved in physical pain. And fortunately, from a lot of years of pain research, we know a lot about the neural regions involved in pain. And I'm just going to talk about two of them today, so this is all you need to know about the brain. The first one is the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex on the left, and the second one is the anterior insula on the right. So this picture on the right is taken if I were to sort of slice my head this way, you'd see activation on the left and right side. These regions activate in response to physical pain, and they seem to track the unpleasant or distressing component of pain. Some people have referred to this as the suffering component of pain. Now, to induce an experience of rejection in the scanner, which is actually kind of difficult because in the fMRI scanner you're laying there alone in sort of a dark tunnel, to do this we used a paradigm called cyberball. So subjects in our study came into the scanner. They were told that they were going to be hooked up over the internet to two other individuals, and that together they'd be playing this virtual ball tossing game. Now, our subjects could see their hands represented at the bottom of the screen, and each of them had a button box, so they could decide on each trial who they wanted to throw the ball to. Now, of course, in reality, our subjects weren't actually playing with two other people. They were playing with a preset computer program. And what happened is that at a set point in time, these two virtual players stopped throwing the ball to our subjects. And this is nice because it allows us to look at what's going on in the brain when people are being socially excluded. I know it's sad the hand keeps moving, compared to when they're being socially included. When we look to see what the brain's doing in response to social exclusion, we found an interesting pattern. We found activation in some of these same neural regions that are involved in physical pain processing. In addition, we found that individuals who showed greater activity in some of these regions were saying that they felt more rejected and more upset by the exclusion experience. And we've been able to show these kinds of effects in a number of different domains. So we've shown in our work that people who, in their everyday social interactions, tend to feel more disconnected and rejected, these individuals show greater activity in some of these pain-related regions. We've also seen that just showing people videos of people making kind of rejecting facial expressions at them, we've called these our disapproving faces, this can actually lead to some of the same pain-related activity as well, even though people know that these videos are not, personally directed at them. And from these findings, we've suggested that there may actually be an overlap in some of the neural regions that underlie physical and social pain. And for the past several years, we've been trying to examine this overlap and test it in different ways. One of the ways that we've tested this overlap is by seeing are individuals who are more sensitive to physical pain also more sensitive to social pain. That should be one of the consequences of this kind of overlap. One of the ways that we've done this is by looking at a genetic marker that's been linked to physical pain sensitivity, the mu opioid receptor gene. And we've tried to see if it's also related to social pain sensitivity. So just as a bit of background, mu opioids are involved in pain processing. So drugs like morphine and codeine, which we all know to be potent painkillers, have their effects by acting on mu opioid receptors. With the mu opioid receptor gene, there are two alleles, or two copies of the gene. There's an A allele and a G allele. So each of us has two copies, one from mom and one from dad. Turns out that individuals with the G allele, either two copies or one copy, tend to be more pain sensitive, and they actually need more morphine to deal with pain. And so here we wanted to see, are these same individuals also more socially pain sensitive? We looked at this in two ways. First, we just looked at a self-report measure of trait rejection sensitivity. How much do these people tend to say that they worried about rejection? And as expected, these individuals with the pain-sensitive allele were reporting that they tended to be more sensitive to rejection. We then also looked at neural sensitivity to rejection by scanning people again as they went through this cyberball task and were excluded, and we saw a very similar pattern. So you can see here these G allele carriers, the ones with the pain-sensitive allele, they're showing greater activity in these pain-related regions, the cingulate and the insula. Now previously when I've presented this work, I'll occasionally get an audience member who kind of jokingly will ask me something like, well, if this is all true, if there's really this overlap, then next time I get rejected, do you think I should take Tylenol or aspirin or something like that? On the surface, that seems like kind of a ridiculous question because you would never think to take Tylenol to deal with social pain. But we've actually recently tested this. So in this study, the question is, does Tylenol, a physical painkiller, also reduce social pain? Our subjects here were randomly assigned to either take Tylenol or placebo every day for a period of 3 weeks. Each evening they were asked to report on their hurt feelings. So they were asked to rate statements like, today I typically felt hurt by what other people said or did to me. And you can see here our placebo group essentially showed no change in hurt feelings over time from day 1 to day 21, but our Tylenol group showed a significant reduction in hurt feelings. Now to look at this a bit more carefully and see what's maybe going on in the brain that's leading people to feel less hurt in response to taking Tylenol, we did a second study. So we brought in a second group of people, again randomly assigned them to take Tylenol or placebo for 3 weeks. This time at the end of the 3-week period, we had them go through the Cyberball social exclusion task in the scanner. And again, we saw a very similar pattern. So our Tylenol group, this darker bar here, they were showing less activity in these pain-related regions, the dorsal cingulate and the anterior insula, in response to exclusion, suggesting that Tylenol may actually not just reduce physical pain, but may reduce social pain as well. So in sum, I hope I've convinced you a little bit that the pain of social rejection may be more than just a metaphor, by showing that social and physical pain rely on some of the same brain regions. And one of the things that I want to mention is that this work kind of shows the usefulness of neuroimaging techniques for understanding certain kinds of social experience. So being able to demonstrate that social rejection is processed in a manner similar to physical pain is difficult to do without some of these brain-based techniques. Unfortunately for us, the cognitive neuroscience community at UCLA has provided us with a lot of the opportunities, the neuroimaging resources, to allow this kind of research to take place. We're currently following up on this work by looking at how we might be able to reduce both physically and socially painful experience. One of the factors that we're looking at right now is social support. And we've started off from the perspective of the support receiver. And what we found here is that for individuals going through a painful experience, just being able to hold a loved one's hand, or actually even more simply than that, even being able to look at a picture of your loved one, actually reduces your experience of physical pain. And we're following up on this to see if we see similar effects with social pain. Finally, in our most recent research, we're also trying to look at what's going on in the brains of the support givers. And surprisingly, it actually turns out that giving support seems to have both rewarding and pain-attenuating effects for the givers of social support, not just for the receivers. So I will end here, and thank you very much for listening.
We will take questions at the end for all of our speakers. But for now, let's move on to our second panelist, who's Jaana Juvonen. And she is a developmental psychologist, and her research focuses on the relationships of adolescents and young teenagers. And in recent years, she's been doing some work that's had a lot of attention on bullying. And you may have read about this work in the Los Angeles Times, in the New York Times, or you may have seen Jaana interviewed in the recent PBS documentary, This Emotional Life, which I believe is available on DVD now. So Jaana is also a faculty member who's been not just doing research in the lab, but actually going out into our community and working with schools to try to reduce the problem of bullying and to improve relationships in the real world, using her science as the foundation of those interventions. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about the work. Jaana, thanks very much.
Thank you. Well, it is my pleasure to give you little tidbits about our work. actually, it's really nice, I think, the picture that you get tonight, the way our work complements one another. That is the work by Naomi focusing on discrete social experiences and their effects. And Tom subsequently will be talking about relationships, specifically couples, that is dyadic relationships. And I, in turn, try to give you a sense of discrete social experiences and peer relationship problems in the larger collective context of schools. So before I go any further, I think we should define what I mean by bullying. This is probably the best definition, the definition that children give. That is, we're basically talking about abuse of power. A stronger individual retaliating against the weaker one. And this can be accomplished in various ways, not only by physical aggression, but also in very covert ways, such as excluding someone or spreading nasty rumors about a peer. And finally, we've all heard about the latest form of bullying, which is cyberbullying. That is the online environment that provides kids opportunities to send nasty rumors or nasty pictures about one another. Now, we study bullying not by conducting experiments. We're not about to do that. We can also very easily observe these situations because by definition, these are typically happening in places where no adult is available. So we focus on naturally unfolding experiences, and most of our work focuses on middle school students. And the reason for this is that we know that bullying peaks during middle school years when the kids are 12 and 14-year-olds. Now, we rely on kids' self-reports, but we also rely on teacher reports, and it turns out that peers are really important informants. Sometimes we conduct daily diaries, that is, we ask after a school day how the kids are feeling, and moreover, ask them to describe about incidents, about events during that day, and relate it to their mood ratings. Sometimes we do anonymous web surveys, and other times we conduct our studies by using paper questionnaires in schools across many years and across different kinds of schools. So most of these data come from my collaboration with Dr. Sandra Graham over in the Department of Education here at UCLA. And most of the data today come from this particular UCLA peer project where we had about 2,000 kids involved across several years. Now, as developmental psychologists, we are first and foremost concerned about the emotional well-being of kids in school. And the way we think about bullying is that bullying both directly and indirectly affects how well kids can function at school. Moreover, we're really interested in the larger social context in which bullying unfolds. And I'll come back to that toward the end of this little talk. So let me tell you a little bit about our findings. Most of our early work focused on the plight of the victims. So let me tell you about some facts about victims, especially in light of some common misconceptions. So one of the misconceptions is that bullying experiences build character. Well, it turns out our research and research of our colleagues clearly shows that bullying experiences do not help build thicker skin, but actually make your skin thinner. In other words, kids become more vulnerable. Kids do not, however, become school shooters. They don't turn into violent perpetrators when they are chronically bullied. Rather, most bullied kids suffer in silence. They suffer from depression and social anxiety, and we rarely know about their plight. That is one of the big challenges for our work. Finally, it's important to recognize that once you are a victim, it does not mean that you're going to stay that way. But we know that for many kids, bullying, thank goodness, is temporary. It doesn't last a long time, and a lot of kids recover. Kids are incredibly resilient, and there are contextual or social factors that we need to better understand that help protect them. However, we do know that there's a small group of kids, somewhere probably between 3 to 5% of kids, who are chronic victims of bullying. And as you know from recent headlines, the consequences of this type of bullying, severe and persistent bullying, can be absolutely devastating. But in our work, as important as it is to try to understand the most devastating cases of why bullying can escalate to a point that somebody takes their own life, it is also important to try to understand the more normative type of bullying where we talk about specific incidents. So in one set of studies, what we've done is we've gathered data on kids on their mood fluctuations on a daily basis. So here are 2 students, and here are their anxiety ratings across 5 days during a 2-week period. Now, our goal in this particular case was to try to understand these peaks in anxiety and whether we could try to understand these peaks, these fluctuations in anxiety as a function of the kinds of incidents that they report either experiencing themselves or having witnessed. And I'm going to spare you from all the statistics and the boring tables of coefficients and basically tell you the short story here, which is that we not only found that on days when kids get bullied personally, their feelings of anxiety, their feelings of humiliation, as well as their somatic complaints of headaches and stomach aches peak, are increased, but also when they witness somebody else getting picked on. And that's really, really important to try to understand. That is, the kids who are there to see what's happening to their peers are also affected. Now, so far I've talked about the plight of the victim, but what about the bullies? So again, I want to address these our findings in light of some misconceptions. Now, it turns out that bullies do not suffer from low self-esteem. If anything, they have inflated self-esteem. They feel very good about themselves. They do not lack social skills. Rather, some of them are extremely skillful. They know exactly how to hurt the feelings of a peer. And finally, bullies are not social isolates, but they are socially quite connected. In fact, they have a lot of status. They are popular, they are cool, and this is precisely why they have such positive self-views. They get feedback from others that boosts their egos. So let me show you some of our data. So again, from middle schools, if you put popularity, coolness on a dimension, you not only see that bullies are popular, much more popular obviously than the unpopular victims, but also that bullies are much more popular than the kids who are uninvolved in bullying situations. Now, as a developmental psychologist, it's really important for us to, for me and for my colleagues to try to understand, put these data into some bigger picture, and one way is to try to understand these findings in the context of different grade levels. So are bullies always cool? Well, it turns out that there's a big difference here between elementary school grades and middle school grades. And look at this. So this is the likelihood that the kids would nominate the same kid as a bully as they do who is the cool kid. In other words, the kids who are likely to be perceived as the bullies are likely to be perceived as the cool kids at 6th grade. The likelihood is substantial, and although it goes slightly down, what's remarkable is in elementary school, the bullies were not cool. If you look at the opposite, if you look at now who would be the kids who dare to challenge the bully, that is, who would be the defenders, you get the opposite trend. So whereas it was a cool thing to defend a victim, to challenge the bully, in elementary school, it no longer is in middle school. So obviously these two slides depict a really negative picture of the relational culture in our middle schools. Now the question is, Are all our middle schools like this? Is there always a pro-bully culture? Is there anything about the school environment that can protect kids? Well, thank goodness we're living in LA, and with my colleague we were able to select schools for our large longitudinal study where the ethnic composition of different groups varied quite systematically. And in particular, it varied for, in this sample, consistently for African American and Latino kids. And specifically, our question was this. Now, when you attend either predominantly Latino school or predominantly African American school, in this particular sample, are you worse or better off than when you attend a very diverse school? That is, when there are lots of different ethnic groups. That is ethnic diversity a risk or protective factor when we talk about feelings of vulnerability, when we talk about sense of getting bullied, sense of safety? Could it be that diversity acts like Tylenol? So here I'm going to be plotting the data as a function of school diversity. And what we found is that self-perceptions of being a victim, self-perceptions of getting bullied, decrease as a function of the diversity of the school. That is, kids were feeling less bullied in the more diverse schools. They were feeling safer at school when they attended the more diverse schools. And loneliness had the same pattern as feelings of victimization. That is, kids were feeling less lonely in the high diverse schools. So we think that these findings are really, really exciting because now we're finding something about protective factors. And in fact, these findings have led us to launch our next big project that just started this fall. And again, I'm doing this in collaboration with my colleague Sandra Graham in the education department. And we are upping the ante major. So in terms of number of schools, different types of schools, number of kids. And essentially what we try to examine further is, can we replicate this finding across different ethnic groups, across different kinds of schools, that ethnic diversity indeed promotes sense of safety? Could it be that in these diverse schools also kids, as they have more kind of niches to fit in, that enables them to belong or identify with multiple groups, and that creates a more complex social identity for them that is protective? And moreover, are the kids in these diverse schools able to take advantage of the richness of the ethnic networks available to them? Do they develop friendships across ethnic boundaries? And moreover, do these cross-ethnic friendships, can they help us predict intergroup attitudes like reduction of prejudice over time? So what have we learned? I think that important piece to remember is that even single incidents of bullying can have devastating consequences. Emotional cost is there even for those who witness them on a daily basis at school. I think it's really important to think about bullying not as an sort of a problem of individual kids, but as a collective challenge. That is, we have to do something about the popularity of the bullies in order to really nix it. We can't deal with it as just an individual problem of specific kids. And finally, that we need to understand the protective factors, for example, in this case, the power of ethnic diversity. Thank you.
Our third speaker tonight is Dr. Tom Bradbury. Whereas we've heard from, so far, a social psychologist and a developmental psychologist, Tom is a clinical psychologist who has spent his career, whereas Jaana was just telling us about the different kinds of relationships that young people have as they go through middle school, Tom tends to study how single relationships change over time. In particular, he's been studying marriage. For many adults, the fundamental and central relationship of many adults' lives. And for Tom, it asks this straightforward question, which is, from the beginning of a marriage, when newlyweds get together, and they are optimistic for the most part and looking forward to a long life together, what happens then? Sometimes they stay together and their hopes come true, sometimes they're disappointed, and sometimes they break up. Well, how do we account for that? That's a question that Tom has been asking provocatively for close to 2 decades now, and along the way has been featured in documentaries, and you've read his work, about his work in the LA Times and other news organizations. He's been a consultant to the federal government. When the government wants to know about what to do about marriage and family policy, Tom Bradbury has been on the phone. Recently, in recent years, Tom has co-founded the Relationship Institute here at UCLA, designed to disseminate the results of relationship research and relationship science to the public. So you may be hearing about that too in the future. But for now, Tom will be telling us a little bit about the science of relationships. And so here we go. Tom Bradbury, please take it away.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I have co-opted the title of the entire series for my presentation, you can see, because my couples actually go through all of those stages. They start off with romance and often end in rejection. Well, the greatest puzzle that draws me into the science of relationships is how could it be that intimate relationships are exceptionally powerful and exceptionally consequential in our lives, yet are also exceptionally difficult to maintain and manage? How could it be that the very crucible in which our species is perpetuated is so fragile? Ben has already outlined how it is that being in relationships, and especially being in good relationships, promotes our physical health, promotes our mental health, actually contributes to the accumulation of wealth in our lives, and certainly promotes the well-being of our children. At the same time, though, we know that 45% of all first marriages will end in separation or divorce. The rates are higher for remarriages. We know that 30% of the couples who are in intact relationships report being unhappy with those relationships. We also know that relationship difficulties are the primary reason why anybody seeks any kind of psychological counseling in the United States. My question is why? Why are relationships so hard? Why is it so difficult to create and manage and sustain an intimate bond? And I want to share with you some of our findings from this line of research. And the important idea is that if we are able to understand some of the forces that govern change in relationships, we ideally should be able to position ourselves to give more people more opportunities to reap the benefits that our relationships really hold in store. Before we can think about the forces that govern change in relationships or that govern relational outcomes, we have to understand what those outcomes are. We have to think hard about what, if you took Psychology 100B, we have to think a lot about the dependent variables that we care about. We have to think about the target of our inquiry. And in order to do this in my work, I start with newlywed couples who have professed in front of their friends and family that they want to stay together with this person for the rest of their lives. Shortly after they make that statement, I lure them into my laboratory. And for the next 4 years, every 6 months, I check in with them and I ask them how their relationship is going. I ask them how happy are they in their relationship. The first 4 years of marriage are the high-risk period for divorce and relationship dissolution. And so this becomes a window that is very important for us to study. It's also the period in which many people have their first child. So we have, for each person, for each husband and each wife in my samples, we have 8 waves of data over the first 4 years of marriage, which we can then represent as a trajectory, an across-time trajectory, representing how their relationships change. We can then extract, in my most recent work, we've extracted what we believe are 5 basic types of relationship outcomes through this developmental window. I want to show those to you now. The results for 232 men are there on top. Their 232 spouses are there on the bottom. The x-axis is number of months married, so that goes out to 4 years. And on the y-axis, up and down there, is a standard measure of relationship satisfaction known as the marital adjustment test. Higher scores are better. And when we apply what's called a semi-parametric mixed group method of analysis to these trajectory data, we end up with these 5 groups. And you can see for the husbands there on the top and the wives there on the bottom, we get 3 groups that look pretty similar across the top. They go straight across the page, and they differ only by degree. But there are two groups of men and two groups of women that seem to be qualitatively distinct. They either start low or end low or both. Those are the couples that are likely to encounter those difficulties that I outlined. People who will have children and who will struggle to promote the wellness of their children. Those are people who are going to become depressed, maybe take drugs, maybe drink more than they should. Those are people who are going to, especially if these patterns persist, these are people who are going to have chronic health problems. And you can see on the right there, for the men and for the women, maybe you can't see them so well, but what we have here are the 10-year divorce rates. So we followed them for 6 years after this last time point, and we can estimate their divorce rates. And they range from about 9% up there down here to 50 or 60%. So we think we're capturing something really meaningful in people's lives when we collect these relationship quality data over time. So that's how we resolve the outcome question. And it's only now that we can start to think about, well, what is going to discriminate among these groups? What are the forces that are going to allow some couples to start off high and really maintain that high degree of satisfaction versus really go down precipitously in the judgments they're making about the quality of their relationship? Why is that? Why is there variability here, and why does it take this shape? To a significant degree, psychologists, people like me, have focused very intently on interpersonal processes. Relationships inherently interpersonal, and so we study, especially in laboratory settings, we're able to watch people as they talk with one another under controlled settings. We ask them, believe it or not, to think of the biggest problem in their relationship and then take 10 minutes and try to work toward a resolution of that. Seems cruel, but it tends to, people jump right in. They know exactly how to do this, and we get very good data, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. So we have observational data. We spend inordinate amounts of time training undergraduates how to watch videotapes and look for very subtle emotional expressions. And we also, as you'll see in a moment, have self-report questionnaires that measure acts of physical aggression in the year preceding the marriage. I want to show you those data now. And keep in mind that there's 5 groups, and that group number 1, the group at the very top, I'm going to call group 5 here. So here on the x-axis, you see the 5 groups. The group to the far right, the group closest to me, are the group that goes on to have the best outcomes. That was the group at the top of the graph. The groups on the far left are the groups that had the lowest levels of relationship functioning over that 48-month span of time. And you can see that there are 3 bars for each of those 5 groups. The first one capturing physical aggression, the next one negative emotion, which is anger plus contempt, expressions of anger plus contempt, and then positive emotion, expressions of humor, interest, and affection. And you can see that as you move from the left side to the right side of this figure, which may be from rejection to romance, I think may be the trajectory that we're talking about, you can see that average levels of physical aggression and negative emotion tend to go down, and levels of positive emotion tend to go up. So we can look within a very constrained laboratory setting and see which couples communicate in which ways and the implications that has for where their relationship is going to head in the next 4 years. And I should say that the y-axis here is what we call a z-score, or a standardized score, so that if a bar is very close to that line, that means that they're very close to the average. If they're above that line, they're very much above average, and below the line is below average. So we've got couples here who are very low, who are achieving very satisfied relationships over this first 4 years, and they have very low levels of aggression relative to the average within the sample, low levels of anger and contempt in their problem-solving conversations, and relatively high levels of positive emotion. So, psychologists are right. There's a lot of good reasons to study interpersonal processes in relationships, and we might think, is there a principle here? Like, is there a story that we could tell? We don't want to simply prescribe for people how to act with their partner, though it's very tempting, and you'll read many self-help books that do that. But what would be the principle? We want to think about the governing principle. But before we do that, and I'll get to that in a minute, we want to say, well, what else matters? If nothing else matters, then this becomes a great target for intervention. But if other things matter, then we may have more targets, or we may have more problems that we have to contend with. So the next graph I want to show you is very similar, but now we're talking about people's personality traits. And I'm not sure I emphasized it, but all of these data are collected at time 1 in the laboratory session. Okay? So these data are collected initially within about 3 months of the marriage. And so you can see on this graph, again, you have the most distressed couples and the couples who go on to struggle the most on the left side. And on the right side, again, you have the couples who go on to have the most satisfying relationships by their own report. And you can see that for the group on the very left, they have very high levels of negative emotionality. We think of neuroticism as a propensity to experience and express negative emotion. And these are personality traits. We're not talking about what they are like within their relationship specifically. We're asking people to simply describe themselves. And our view is that these are traits, these are characteristics that individuals would bring into virtually any relationship that they would have. It's difficult to change your level of negative emotionality. It's difficult to change your level of trait anger, which is your propensity to get angry in a variety of different situations, all assessed with questionnaires. It's difficult to change your impulsivity, the extent to which you act without thinking. And it's relatively difficult to change your self-esteem. And so you can see that as you move from the left to the right of this graph, self-esteem is low and then goes above average, whereas neuroticism, trait anger, and impulsivity start off high. And then as you move to that fifth group, which has the highest level of relationship functioning, they're really quite low in those exact same traits. Now, so what this tells us is that when we see couples who are at risk and who are engaging in certain sorts of behaviors that are likely to be maladaptive for the long-term health of their relationship, those are also bundled alongside personality traits that are very powerful. And as much as we might want to change those interpersonal behaviors, they are really tightly embedded with personality traits that may make it difficult for people to change those behaviors or to respond in favorable ways to positive statements that their partner may make of them. Just want to show you one more graph. And I want to talk about a third factor. And again, we're testing alternatives. What other things matter? What other forces are we contending with when we think about why different couples achieve different kinds of outcomes in their relationship? And the graph that I want to show you is really has been invisible to a large degree in most research on intimate relationships. And it's a surprise that it's invisible. And it's the chronic and acute stresses that people deal with in their lives. And the idea, as you'll see here, is that individuals, again, all assessed at time 1 when people just come off the altar. When we assess their levels of acute stress, things like a car accident that they might have been in, or an argument with a neighbor, or perhaps a friend was hospitalized or arrested, those are acute events. They give you a very quick hit and they need an immediate adaptation, and then we respond to them and usually move on. We can count those and again relate them to eventual trajectories that people follow over the next 4 years of their life. And we can also measure their chronic stress, the extent to which maybe their job is very stressful. Maybe individuals have very stressful jobs, or maybe they have a partner who has a chronic health condition that requires a lot of management, or maybe they don't get along with their in-laws. Right? So we can measure chronic stress. We do that actually in a very detailed interview. And again, we see the same picture. We see evidence for individuals who go on to struggle are not only struggling to generate positive emotion and contain negative emotion in their conversations, but they're also really struggling with their own personalities. And part of the fire under this particular pot may be the chronic stress that they're having to contend with in their daily lives. So, let me try to pull this all together. And again, I think what we want to try to do is look for a theme, look for principles. And here's a principle that I believe is very powerful and appropriate for these data. Relationships succeed when partners create security and eliminate threat. And if you know John Bowlby's work, an attachment theorist, this will sound a lot like the nomothetic part of John Bowlby's model. And I believe there's great truth to it, and I believe that when I see couples talking in my laboratory and really trying to express humor and interest and affection, what they're doing is creating a sense of security, a very primal experience for human beings. And when they hit one another or yell at one another or say really hostile things in my lab, I think they're telling one another that I don't value you so much. I don't understand what you're talking about. And there is a regulatory process that's gone awry. And it's difficult to communicate well. It's difficult to reach out and manage someone else's frustration and put your own feelings aside, put your own needs aside. That task, by its very nature, is difficult, and it's compounded by other difficult tasks that we have in our intimate relationships. So comprising this task are forces that are difficult to recognize, control, and change. Things like our personality traits, our life experiences, acute events that hit us, and chronic stresses that are always eating away at us in the background. So I've painted with very broad strokes, but I think these are the reasons why intimate relationships are so difficult, why intimate relationships are so hard. And it's worth noting, I think, that the more we study human intimacy, and as you think about what Naomi and Jaana and I have talked about today, that intimate relationships are inherently emotional. We're talking about emotion in interpersonal situations. And in order to understand intimate relationships, we need to understand the conversations that we have with our intimate partners and the feelings that those conversations evoke in them and what they do to evoke similar feelings in us. But that ability to generate those behaviors and respond to those behaviors is a function of who we are as in terms of our personality and the life experiences that we've had. And those processes themselves are embedded in ecological niches that complicate that process tremendously. So, relationship scientists are uniquely suited to answer these questions about human interaction and about human emotion. And I think that as we do more research along these lines, we'll be in a better position to give more couples healthy, strong families and relationships. Thanks.
We promised you time to ask these panelists your own questions about their work or about relationships or about relationship science. Our panels run a little bit long, but the secret is that we have this room for a little bit while longer. So if you are able to stay, please do. And if you have questions, now would be a time to ask any or all of the panelists what you've been wondering about with respect to relationships. And if you can raise your hand or speak from where you're seated, or you can